What I want to do is give you a quick context and kind of a framing of how did we get here, because I think that kind of a narrative is important, just so people have the sense of what was the sequence of events that got us here. And for me, in the 90s, I spent 10 years in Europe restructuring large European organizations. My joke is that I did a lot of French companies, which is why I'm bald. And I think those of you from France will understand that. And by the way, I will try and offend everybody equally in this talk. So I'm trying not to pick anybody out. But we did a project for Philips in Holland. We designed for Philips an incubator where they could take some of the technologies that were on strategy but off the main roadmap and implement them. And except the immune system attacked that idea, and we found out it took them 8 years to actually launch that incubator, long after we'd gone. So that was kind of interesting for me. And then I went off to do some technical entrepreneurship, got to the US, went out to the West Coast 10 years ago, and I was talking to Yahoo about their incubator. And I used basically the design that we had somewhat in Holland to think about what would you do with an incubator at Yahoo. And what was staggering, I figured, okay, Yahoo's a super advanced company, amazing management techniques, etc. And I found the same problem. You try and launch an incubator to do disruptive things, and the antibodies from the company attack you, right? And everybody in innovation has this same kind of narrative. And if you look in their back, you'll see the arrows in their back from the attacks they've received. And what happens is if you try something disruptive, either the company rejects it or it gets diluted so much that by the time it gets accepted, it's incremental at best. It's basically a feature, it's not really a product, and it's certainly not disruptive. And this pattern I found fascinating, that even in a company as theoretically advanced as Yahoo, you had this basic problem. I set up a relationship with NASA, which led me to Singularity, and for many years built and ran many of the courses at SU. And we would get the question from the participants at these programs saying, okay, I get the disruption. What the hell do I do on Monday? And I've been looking at this whole breed of new companies since 2007, 2008 that is built up, the Airbnbs, Ubers, etc. And we noticed that there is a completely new breed of organizations that is scaling in a way that we have never seen it before. You think of the speed at which Uber reached 1 billion people or whatever. Once they hit that inflection point, their growth is actually exponential. Now, we've seen that with technology, but for the first time ever, we're seeing that in companies. And so we did a year of research analyzing the 100 fastest moving companies to see what are the techniques and mechanisms they're using to scale this quickly. And I'll just highlight TED as a good example. Back in 2005, 2006, TED was a nice conference with 1,000 people going to Monterey. Chris Anderson takes it over, and he does 3 things. He establishes a huge purpose, ideas worth spreading. He then gives all the TED Talks away for free on YouTube, leveraging rich media and the internet boom. And then he allows anybody to go create a TEDx event, right? And in 10 years, he has a global media brand. And nobody has ever done that before. And his cost of doing this was pretty much 0. So you can take an established environment, blow it open to a global level at pretty much 0 cost. This is absolutely fascinating. So after we kind of analyzed this for a while, we came up with this paradigm that we have that's completely new. I'm going to try and share my screen just for a second here. Let's see if I can do this. And the concept was, okay, we're seeing this new breed of organization. How are they doing this? And we kind of started to tease out some of the techniques and characteristics. And then this quote by David Rose from Gust, who's one of the godfathers of angel investing, has been stuck in my head. And he makes the point that all of our organizations are built for the 20th century. They're designed for efficiency and for predictability. John Hagel from Deloitte also identifies these things. And we are not architected for flexibility, agility, or speed, which are the high order bits today. And so this was fascinating to us. And then we looked at these 100 companies that are all moving incredibly fast. I'll highlight just GitHub, which when we score companies on our exponential score, that is the back of the EXO book, GitHub was the highest ranking company. And if those of you tracking this, they have no assets, no workforce, no intellectual property, and they just got bought by Microsoft for $7.5 billion. Okay, so this is kind of incredible. And so we've been tracking this paradigm and looking at how these companies get created. And these are the basic attributes of an exponential organization. You have on the right, you have at the top a massive transformative purpose. And every single one of these EXOs has one. Uber is everybody's private driver. Singularity is go impact 1 billion people positively. X Prize is a bridge to abundance for all. And it's basically the North Star. Simon Sinek, who I talked to a few days ago, has this concept of purpose. And many of us are tracking and finding that this new generation of millennials really wants much more purpose to deal with the world that's coming. And they're not driven by the same motivations as previous generations. Of course, once you hire them, they're hard to manage, but that's a different story. But they're all driven by that. And so you hire based, I think we'll end up with hiring people based on the alignment between the company's MTP and an individual's MTP, right? And so we started looking at this. The 5 characteristics on the right are the externalities that these companies use to scale very quickly. Staff on demand, Uber doesn't hire its own staff, TED is using community, Google is using algorithms, Airbnb is leveraging other people's assets, and then we have digital engagement models, etc. All managing those externalities allows you to keep a small feature footprint and scale very quickly. And then on the left, you have the control framework that drives that side of it and drives culture, right? So the real-time dashboard, the whole lean startup methodology. We found out, for example, that lean does not work just by itself. You need an MTP and autonomy to allow lean to really flourish, right? And so we advise a lot of companies on how to do a portfolio of these attributes, not just one. And by the way, when we were kind of coming up with these things, finding the acronym of scale and ideas was really hard. And I remember Yuri and I spent a day trying to figure this out, and Peter and I spent another day figuring this out. And we spent probably collectively about 8 man-days trying to figure out this acronym. And then Sarah Sklarczyk, who's one of the students from GSP09, comes along and in 5 minutes figures it out. And then she says, do you have an Advil? Because I have a migraine. And so this is somebody with a brain that really is needed by the whole world to operate in this way. So that we came up with the algorithm and the acronym for this. And now we've been seeing companies build on this model. And more we got to that point. The question then became, okay, you can see this disruption. We can see how new EXOs are starting. How do you retrofit this thinking into a legacy organization? And that has become really the driving force behind this. And I've been doing a lot of speaking and coaching of large companies to figure out how are they doing this. I'll touch on the company that has succeeded at this the most. When we advise companies, we give them 2 suggestions. One is update your leadership, that we are in a totally new world. But more importantly, do not do disruptive innovation in the core organization. You'll end up with this political fight and you end up with a lot of mess. Do it at the edge, pointing into adjacent spaces. Larry Page asked me about this, and you see the result with Google X, where they have their core capability and then they do disruption at the edge. The master of this technique is Apple, right? What Apple does, unlike anybody else in the world, is they will form a small team that's really disruptive. They'll take them to the edge of the organization. They'll keep them completely stealth and secret, and they will say to them, go disrupt another industry, right? And so they have a portfolio of teams analyzing other industries. And hey, who knew they're now $1 trillion company, Amazon close at their heels. There is no reason they don't get to 2 trillion because they have no limit to their market cap. So if you're not doing this, today either you're the disruptor or you're disrupted, right? So we've kind of solved the problem of, okay, here's how you do disruption at the edge. But now the question becomes, how do you transform and increase the metabolism of the core organization? 2 points. One is the metabolism of the external world with all of these technologies moving quickly now exceeds that of our internal core organizations, right? Think about the idea that in any company, 99% of the conversation is about what's happening inside the company, not what's happening outside, right? And so we need to fix that. It takes too long for a company to accept a new idea, get approvals for things, because they're all architected for that 20th century aspect. Note that there's not a single MBA program in the world that can teach you how to build Uber, right? Every MBA program in the world teaches you how to build a 20th century organization. So we need a totally new style of this. And so we were puzzling over this for a while. And then 3 years ago, the global CIO for Procter & Gamble and Tony Saldana, the head of IT, came along and said, hey, could we work with you? And we found it takes a company about 3 years to fully wake up and get the picture of what's going on. And we said, let's try and shrink that. And that's basically what's resulted in the ExO Sprint, which we'll talk about next. But I want to highlight, just to end this discussion with one point of what is it that makes these exponential organizations tick. When you're running a business, you worry about demand and supply, right? And specifically, what's the cost of demand, what's the cost of supply? And you try and optimize on both sides. The internet, for the first time ever, when it arrived, allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially, right? Online marketing, referral marketing. If you get a viral loop, which is the holy grail for all Silicon Valley companies, your acquisition costs go to zero. And that was actually the first time in the history of business we could acquire customers at no cost. So that's one paradigm that's been going on. But what EXOs do, exponential organizations, they have figured out how to drop the cost of supply exponentially, right? You think about Airbnb, the marginal cost of adding a room to their inventory is almost zero. Whereas if you're Hyatt or Marriott or somebody else, you have to build a whole hotel. And you can't compete with almost zero marginal cost of supply, right? So now you take out the denominator and the market cap explodes of these companies. That's why they're doing so well. And when we ran this process with Procter & Gamble, we really realized there's something here. And then we started building the community. And a huge shout out to Shay Fehrenbach, who's one of our co-founders and has helped build the community and the paradigm and has kind of helped anchor us over the last few years. Many of you know her. Please give her acknowledgements for her part in all of this. So incredible kind of success that we've seen. Now we're taking it to a new level because right now we kind of are pretty clear that every single one of the Global 5,000 and all mid-sized companies need to go through this process with or without us. And so essentially we're open sourcing it. And that's what this book is about. So let me pause there. We're happy to take some questions. I'll pass it back. And incredibly happy to be here, and I can't be more excited about the launch of this book.
Great.